Hello and welcome to Chris Shoots the Views, Northumberland. I will be your narrator throughout the video. I have been created because the real Chris can't be bothered to use his own voice. This is Housesteads Roman fort, built around 122 AD, located just outside of Hexham at roughly the halfway point of Hadrian's wall. Housesteads was a large fort covering 2.2 hectares, garrisoned by auxiliaries, infantry and cavalry raised from the conquered peoples of the empire. It was intended from the outset to hold an infantry regiment of 800 men, known as a miliary cohort. It is the most complete example of a Roman fort in Britain and one of the best known from the entire Roman Empire. After capturing the drone footage, Chris leaves Housesteads and follows Hadrian's wall west towards Sycamore Gap. Hadrian's wall was built under the command of Emperor Hadrian in 122 AD, hence its name. The wall stretches from coast to coast and is 117 kilometers or 73 miles long. As first planned, most of the wall was to be built in stone, but the western 30-mile section was in turf. In front of both was a substantial ditch, except where crags or rivers made this unnecessary. At each mile, a gate was protected by a small guard post called a mile castle. Between each pair of mile castles lay two turrets, creating a pattern of observation points every third of a mile. The stone wall, with a maximum height of about 4.6 metres, was 3 metres wide enough for there to have been a walkway along the top and perhaps also a parapet wall. Before the first plan was completed, a radical change led to the placing of forts on the wall line and down the Cumbrian coast, and the construction of an earthwork to the south. The position of the forts and the provision of so many gates suggest that a requirement for increased mobility led to this change. After the forts had been added, the width of the wall was narrowed to 8 Roman feet, 2.4 metres or less, and the standard of craftsmanship reduced, both presumably in order to speed up work. Although mainly built by legionaries, the wall was manned by auxiliaries. They were organised into regiments nominally either 500 or 1,000 strong, and either infantry or cavalry, or both. The 500-strong mixed infantry and cavalry unit was the workhorse of the frontier. Each fort on the wall appears to have been built to hold a single auxiliary unit. The troops based in the forts and mile castles of the wall were mostly recruited from the northwestern provinces of the Roman Empire, though some were from further afield. Hadrian's death in AD 138 brought a new emperor to power, the Emperor Antoninus Pius. He abandoned Hadrian's Wall and moved the frontier up to the Fourth Clyde Isthmus, where he built a new wall made of turf, the Antonine Wall. This had a short life of about 20 years before being abandoned in favour of a return to Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall had been slighted when it was abandoned, with mile castle gates removed and crossings thrown across the Vallum ditch. The wall was brought back to working order, but some parts were never restored. In the late 2nd or early 3rd century, many mile castles had their north gates narrowed so that they could only be used by pedestrian traffic, while a major repair to the wall itself took place. The forts on Hadrian's Wall had a long life of nearly 300 years. Many modifications took place to the barrack blocks, the headquarters buildings, and the commanders' houses in particular. Some forts became overcrowded with buildings, others acquired open spaces. As far as we can determine, all the forts continued to the end of Roman Britain. We are now 2 miles west of Housesteads at Sycamore Gap. Sadly, the iconic tree that had been there for roughly 120 years was illegally felled in 2023. In the years that followed the Romans, Hadrian's Wall became a sort of quarry for the stone to build castles, churches, farms and houses along its line, until the conservation movement in the 18th and 19th centuries put a stop to that. It was only from the mid-19th century onwards that early archaeologists and historians began to study Hadrian's Wall in earnest and sought to protect its still magnificent remains. Second day of the trip, and you join Chris as he's on the move to Bamburgh, which is just a 10-minute drive up the coast from where he is staying in Beadnell. Bamburgh's recorded history begins in 547 AD, when King Ida, an invading Angle chief, established the royal city and capital of Bernicia at Bamburgh. The name Bamburgh originates from the time of Ethelfrith, who named the fortress, or borough, after his wife and queen, Bebba. Over the years, the name Bebba's Borough was simplified to Bamburgh. One of the most powerful Northumbrian kings associated with Bamburgh was King Oswald, 634 to 642 AD, a pagan who converted to Christianity and appointed Saint Aidan as the first bishop of nearby Lindisfarne, making this northeastern corner of Northumbria an important focal point for early Christian cultural developments. Northumbria, occupying almost a third of the whole British mainland, became one of the strongest Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Britain and was ruled from two capitals, at York and here at Bamburgh. Although for a time the supremacy of the Northumbrian kings was challenged by the great Midland Kingdom of Mercia, Bamburgh remained an important Anglo-Saxon centre. North Northumbria remained a fiercely independent Anglo-Saxon province right up until the time of the Norman conquest. In later times, the Viking Kingdom of York had challenged Bamburgh's supremacy, and the fortress was a target for the Danes on more than one occasion, falling victim to the raiders in 993 AD. Later down the line, it was here in 1464 that King Henry VI and his wife, Queen Margaret of Anjou, fled to, following a defeat by the Yorkists in a battle at Hexham. For a short time, the disheartened monarch held court at Bamburgh, during which time the great building encompassed the total extent of his kingdom. Eventually Henry was defeated when Bamburgh came under siege from the artillery of Edward IV under the powerful Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, known as Warwick the Kingmaker. Heavy artillery was used in the siege, and Bamburgh became the first castle in England to fall to cannon fire. In 1894, Bamburgh was purchased by the Tyneside industrialist William Lord Armstrong. During Armstrong's period of ownership, the castle underwent significant restoration and rebuilding under the guidance of the architect Charles Ferguson. Armstrong and his architect must take significant credit for the wonderful edifice that we see in present day, and his Armstrong family descendants continue to maintain the castle for the enjoyment of the visitors that come to see the magnificent castle now. After visiting Bamburgh, we head south to a small village on the coast called Crasta, which is just a short walk away from the next destination, Dunstanburgh Castle. Spectacular ruins of Dunstanburgh Castle defend a headland on the rugged Northumberland coast. This now ruined castle was begun in 1313 by Earl Thomas of Lancaster, one of the richest noblemen in England, cousin and leading baronial enemy of Edward II. He built on a massive scale, proclaiming his rivalry with the crown. Earl Thomas was later executed for his role in the Barons' Rebellion against Edward II. The castle was extensively modernised in the 1380s under John of Gaunt. It played a role as a Lancastrian stronghold in the Wars of the Roses. The castle saw plenty of action during the Wars of the Roses, as it changed hands at least 5 times. Each time it was besieged with cannon fire, and in the end, little was left of the castle. By the end of the Middle Ages, it fell into disrepair. Dunstanburgh Castle is a place famous for wildlife. Seabirds nest on the cliffs in the spring and summer, and the grassland hosts ground-nesting birds like skylarks. would have been good to get some drone footage of both of today's castles, but sadly the weather was a little bit too windy to fly. We joined Chris on day 3 as he is crossing the Holy Island Causeway onto Holy Island, also known as Lindisfarne. Holy Island is a tidal island linked by the causeway. The island gets cut off twice a day by the tide. With its ancient associations, its castle and priory ruins, Lindisfarne remains today a holy site and place of pilgrimage for many. Possibly the holiest site of Anglo-Saxon England, Lindisfarne was founded by Saint Aidan, an Irish monk who came from Iona, the centre of Christianity in Scotland. Saint Aidan converted Northumbria to Christianity at the invitation of its king, Oswald. Saint Aidan founded Lindisfarne Monastery on Holy Island in 635, becoming its first abbot and bishop. The island of Lindisfarne, with its wealthy monastery, now known as Lindisfarne Priory, was a favourite stopover for Viking raiders from the end of the 8th century. These Viking raiders obviously concerned the monks somewhat as they vacated the monastery and did not return for 400 years. Lindisfarne Castle's origins go back to the old borderlands and a time of religious and political upheaval. From the 1550s up until 1893, the castle was garrisoned by the government, at one point mounting 21 cannons. The castle was strategically vital during the Scottish Wars of the mid-1500s, and later saw action in the Civil Wars and the Jacobite Rebellion of 1715. Edward Hudson of Country Life magazine took on the lease in 1901. He commissioned the architect Edwin Ned Lutyens and garden designer Gertrude Bumps Jekyll to refurbish the castle to meet his taste. They were responsible for the most dramatic changes made to Lindisfarne Castle since the time of Elizabeth I. Together, their vision gave their patron Edward Hudson a comfortable, if slightly exposed, holiday home. Hudson's successors never made any major changes, and so it's largely the work of Lutyens and Jekyll that greets visitors today. During its period as a holiday home, circa 1906 to 1968, Lindisfarne Castle had 3 different owners. These men all had different uses for it and welcomed different guests, but throughout this period there was one constant: the Lilburne family. Jack and Hannah Lilburne began the 3-generation relationship as housekeepers for the castle's owners. Continuing in the tradition of most of the men on Holy Island before him, Jack Lilburne had always been a fisherman. All that changed when Edward Hudson came calling. Both Jack, known to islanders as Wheeler, and his wife Hannah were to be employed as caretakers and housekeepers of Lindisfarne Castle. Hannah looked after the castle itself and did most of the housework, while Jack was responsible for maintenance and odd jobs, such as fetching coal or firewood. Jack was also responsible for collecting Hudson's guests, delivering them to the castle. This involved driving a horse and cart from the railway station, usually at Beadnell, and bringing them across the Holy Island sands. If the tide was in, Jack often physically carried the visitors through shallow water into a boat and rowed them across from Ross Sands, near to where the 2 navigation beacons are today, opposite the castle. Edward Hudson was certainly very fond of Jack and Hannah, as well as their children George and Linda. These youngsters would eventually succeed their parents as keepers of the castle for the later owners. Hudson wrote to Jack in December 1921, explaining that he had sold Lindisfarne Castle. He assured him that he would visit again, and that new owner Mr. Falk didn't wish to make any difference to Jack and Hannah's lives. Jack died in 1954, and shortly after Hannah too in 1956. They are both buried at St. Mary's Church in the village. George's daughter Linda, the last Holy Island Lilburne, died in 2008. Hudson sold the castle in 1921 for £25,000 to the London stockbroker Oswald Falk. Within a few years, Falk had then sold it on to Sir Edward de Stine, a rich merchant banker. Sir Edward then gave the castle to the National Trust in 1944 and lived here until his death in 1965. His sister Gladys took over the tenancy until she died in 1968. Lindisfarne Castle was subsequently opened to the public by the National Trust, restored very much the way it would have been when Edward Hudson and his house guests spent their summers here in the years before World War I. Boat sheds of Holy Island. The tradition of using retired boats as sheds goes back centuries, but it was particularly common in the 19th and early 20th centuries on the east coast of England. The sheds on Holy Island are probably the best surviving examples. There are 12 boats at the harbour and 3 at the castle. Each has its own story to tell. Like most other visitors to the island, Edward Hudson was rather taken with the idea of boat sheds. He organised for 2 to be hauled up to the base of the eastern elevation of the castle, probably in about 1905. A 3rd shed was added in late 1912 or early 1913. Holy Island Harbour is still a working one, from which the island's fishermen go out daily, coming back with mostly crab and lobster. If you eat these on the island, they are likely to be fresh and locally caught. During the Industrial Revolution, the harbour was used to ship lime from the lime kilns, and you can still see the rotting remains of the old jetty towards the castle, the subject of many atmospheric photos taken here, in which Chris annoyingly completely missed when visiting, as well as the lime kilns next to the castle, which are pretty hard to miss. Holy Island Causeway, connecting Holy Island to the mainland. A 3-mile-long road, and twice daily the North Sea tides sweep in, engulfing safe passage to the island. Just next to the road is Pilgrim's Way, a historic walking route that takes you to the island across the sand. Ever since the year 635, when King Oswald gave the holy island of Lindisfarne to St. Aidan to establish his monastery, the island has been a place of pilgrimage. The road was not constructed until 1954, and until then, the vertical poles were the only indicators of the safe route between the mainland and Ireland. The sight of the poles stretching across the sand and mud is one of the most iconic views in Northumberland, and to walk the route away from the road and follow in the footsteps of our medieval ancestors is a wonderful experience. One in which Chris hopes to do the next time he visits the island. After a quick visit to Berwick-upon-Tweed and a recharge of the drone batteries, we returned to see if the rising tide has engulfed the causeway. Well done if you made it to the end. If you enjoyed it, Northumberland Part 2 is already underway and will be coming soon to YouTube. As always, thanks a lot for watching. This has been Chris Shoots the View. Catch you in the next one.